pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Members of the Board of Education, we first have on our agenda the duty to adopt the consent agenda. So do we have a motion to consider and approve the consent agenda? So moved. Second? Second, thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll move it to a vote. All in favor of passing and approving the consent agenda, raise your hand, say aye. Aye. All opposed? Any abstentions? Okay, very good. Thank you. We have a policy, new policy number 3240 that is being considered for non-resident admission and tuition fees. Again, this is a second reading. Generally, the board does 3 readings before a policy is passed. That information was provided to board members in your packet. Does anybody have any discussion? Does anybody report a discussion about that policy? Does anyone have anything to say? Any questions? No? Yes. All right. So seeing no discussion about that, we'll move on to the next, which is the next agenda item, number 5, which is the superintendent's report. Dr. Cook.
Thank you, Chairman Clauskin, and thank you to our audience members for coming tonight. Just want to say it's great to see the new board seated and have all 9 members present. This is fantastic. First time as superintendent that I've my 9 board members with me. So this is it's really great to see. I look forward to working with all of you. Our first item that we have under the superintendent's report is our second reading and final reading of our educational specs for the proposed new school, elementary school. The previous board has seen this on 2 occasions. We presented them as an introduction, and then we had a first reading in our last meeting. It was the intention that it would have been approved back in October, but our meeting was canceled. We provided the ed specs to you, and we also have Daniel Hansen online with us tonight. Dan is a retired school administrator. He worked for the South Windsor Public Schools, and in his work there as assistant superintendent did many things, but one of the real defining moments of his career was at the end, was building several elementary schools and a middle school as they went through quite a bit of work in the South Windsor Public Schools, and so he has really seen it all. And through our work with Colliers and Dan Hansen, he's been a tremendous to the district in this work. Dan met with many staff over the last few years to bring you these ed specs, and is here to really at this point answer any questions for the board. Or Dan, if there's anything you'd like to share, I know you enjoyed the process here. You've shared that with the board previously, but if you want to introduce yourself and just say a little bit maybe about how we got to this point.
Yes. Thank you and good evening, Mr. Chairman and members of the board, Dr. Cook and administration. It has been a pleasure to work with the Madison community in developing these educational specifications for a new pre-K elementary school. And as I mentioned in a previous board meeting, the educational specifications for a new project is required by the state to be filed along with the grant submission to the State Office of School Construction. The educational specifications, commonly referred to as ed specs, must be developed with input from staff from all program areas and reviewed and approved by the Board of Education. The ed spec document before you tonight as a second read was developed with the input of nearly 45 staff members, including administrators, teachers, and support staff from all program areas. The ed specs also identify the core documents of the Madison Public Schools with regard to its vision for learning, curriculum development, and the profile of a graduate. These core beliefs guided the discussions during many of the program meetings with staff. And as I have mentioned before, on a personal note, I must let you know how impressed I was by the dedication, professionalism, and enthusiasm of your staff for the work that they do every day for the children of Madison. It is important to note that the educational specifications do not specify the design of a new school facility, but rather the document identifies the spaces required for all program areas, including classrooms for general education programs, special education programs, as well as the many support services within a school, such as administrative services, related services, health services, food services, and custodial services. The ed specs identify how much space is required for each program area and often suggests the relationships among those program areas. Ultimately, the board-approved educational specifications are used as a guiding document for the architects during the design phase of the building project. And it has been a pleasure for me to work with Dr. Cook and his staff during this process. Thank you.
Any questions for Mr. Hanson from the board, or any questions about the educational specs? Thank you. And if anything comes up, feel free to let us know. If we can't answer that, we will pass it on to Mr. Hanson. Dan, thank you for your time. It's been great working with you, and I know we'll see you soon.
Yes.
Thank you. Our next item is a continued discussion on the project budget. And with us tonight is Chuck Warrington from Colliers, who's been as well a great asset to work with on the district. Wendy, could you bring up the project budget for our elementary school first, and so Warrington, walk us through that. If you could, yeah, I think the best spot.
That. All right, good evening. Everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
District shared. Do we have the total project budget, the detailed one by chance?
Wendy, if you could pull up a two-page document.
Two-page.
Yes.
Sure. Give me just a moment. Nope. Oh, boy. Okay. One moment. I'm sorry.
Yes,
Well,
while Wendy's bringing this up, so the budget we're going to show you tonight, we're going to kind of walk through it, kind of explain all the parts to it. This is what we call a total project budget. Many times when we hear about how much a project costs in the construction industry, a lot of times they're referring to construction costs. And in many projects, in addition to the construction costs the contractor will be spending, you're going to also have costs for architect's fees, other professional fees, and consultants for a project. In schools, we also have furniture, fixtures, and equipment. We call that FF&E. There's a section for that. That's essentially all your student desks, your teacher desks, your chairs, your equipment, potentially laptops, computers, AV equipment. Basically, you take the building, if you turn it upside down, anything that falls out of that is essentially an FF&E item for the most part. All the rest is permanently installed under construction. There'll also be the financing costs that the town's going to incur to take out the bonds. That's part of the project. It's an ineligible cost of the state, but that's part of it as well. Escalation, because we developed the budget in today's dollars, and we're not going to be going to construction for a couple of years, hopefully. And once that occurs, we have to escalate those dollars because there is a cost for escalation on these projects. And if you don't account for that, you'll end up short of your budget. And then the last part is going to be what we call owner's contingency, and we'll go through that as well. That's for unforeseen conditions in the field or betterments during construction that the town may want.
I apologize. If you could give me just a moment.
Take your time, Wendy. The document that was shown, we'll hit that second. That's what we call an estimated district share calculator. And that's basically a forecast of what we think the likely cost will be to the town of Madison. And then what the reimbursement from the state of Connecticut is. That's purely an estimate. It's based upon a couple items. One, the total project cost. We assume what they call ineligible costs. Anything outside of the property limits. So in this project, we're going to need to run a water line from this campus around to Mungertown Road over to the site. That'll be an eligible cost, as well as some other miscellaneous ineligibles outside the property line, as well as certain elements, certain change orders, certain FF&E items that I described will be ineligible according to the state. They're mostly smaller items, ones that you won't take a 20-year bond out on, but districts do purchase them. So those are ineligible as well. We assume about 5 to 7% ineligible. We see that typically on projects. And that ineligible cost gets taken off the top of the project. It's kind of like when you're going for college, your financial aid, you get scholarships, they're going to take that off the top and then they're going to calculate your need. So kind of a similar fashion to come up with a net eligible cost. Here we go. Wendy, can we increase the percent on that a little bit? There we go. This might be a little bit small, so I apologize for it. So the projected enrollment for this building, and I think as Dan Hansen might have covered, is approximately 600 students from pre-K to 5. That's a very important number. The state of Connecticut looks at enrollment projections, and there's a calculation called space standard that they use to say this is approximately what the size of the building should be, but more importantly, they base their reimbursement to districts based upon that space standard calculation. So so many square feet per student on the enrollment for it. And ultimately, we factor that up for exterior walls and a couple other technical reasons. But our proposed building for this project will be just over 82,000 square feet. So pretty good sized building. That's about an average size elementary school we see. They vary from 65,000 roughly to 100,000 for the most part. Some are bigger in other districts for that. So that square footage for that new construction, that's a large driver for the school. And again, that matches the ed spec that Dan Hansen just talked about a little while ago. We also are assuming in this budget the abatement and demolition of Ryerson School, because that's going to be abandoned. We've accounted for dollars to abate and abandon that and basically level the site, fill it in with gravel, topsoil, and just reestablish it. Nothing too fancy there for that as well. Down here in this block here, we use cost per square foot factors when we're developing these budgets. The state of Connecticut allows a maximum of $365 per square foot. That's going to be pretty close to what we need because just a couple of years ago, we did 2 new schools in South Windsor. Those came in at an average of $332 per square foot for the building alone. And when you factor that up by escalation, you're getting very close, maybe just above the 365, but that's the max by the state. We're assuming $25 per square foot for demolition and abatement. That's based upon bids also received for similar types of projects we've demolished for that. So if you scroll down a little bit, Wendy. And our next section down here, so you can see here, building construction. So basically, we're just taking our square footage multiplied by our cost per square foot to come up with the building costs, roughly $30 million for the building. And that's just the building alone. That's not the site, just the building, the foundations, and upwards. For that, about $1.2 million for demolition and abatement of Ryerson. And that also includes some minor costs for site work. The next section here is basically our site work. And we've tracked many projects, mostly elementary schools, similar in nature. And we take the percentage of site work against what the building costs were. They range anywhere from 15 to 25%, depending on the size of the site and other utilities. We're leaning more towards the mid 20% on ours, and would count for about $7.5 million for site work. We're going to have on-site septic system here. We're going to have city water coming in. You might require a treatment plant potentially. We are studying that with the building committee and staff and other consultants to evaluate that. But that's only for the site work. We've accounted for the water, that additional water line. We put a line item so we can account for it and we can track it. $750,000. We've got estimates from Connecticut Water, the local water company, to help support that. And then also potentially a treatment plant, because we think we're going to be under Connecticut DEP regulations based on a bunch of different factors. So we've accounted for dollars for that as well. So we can look at that later. If we scroll down a little bit, Wendy. So we've also accounted, hopefully, we'd like to explore the use of geothermal wells and sustainability. This building, by the way, will conform by law. They call it the Connecticut High Performance Building Standard. That's equivalent to LEED Silver certification. Only difference, we're not getting a plaque. We're not going through paying a lot of fees for the certification. All the requirements and performance standards are the same for that. So that's required by state law. But we have accounted for $500,000 to account for that. That's based upon some estimates we've seen in other elementary schools of similar size. But we have to test the site. There's a lot of technical studies we're going to have to go through to ensure we can do that. We're hopeful we can do that. We'll also account for, you'll see solar panels, PV array, photovoltaics. Typically what we do in these projects, we'll count structurally on the roof an additional about 5 pounds a square foot to account for a balancing system for these panels, and hopefully do a power purchasing agreement where hopefully you can come in, have them installed for free, and then you do an agreement with these contractors and power companies to do that for you. So we sum all of these costs up, the building costs, your site costs, utility costs, with a subtotal, and then we add escalation. This is a very important factor. We up to about 4.5%. If anybody's been tracking, watching the news, or is in the industry, some material costs are up. There's a lot of long lead times. We're keeping our fingers crossed. Hopefully this comes back to normal by the time we go out to bid. But right now we are challenged. One of my colleagues is here. We're challenged with that right now up to bid. So we're really keeping a close track on that as we speak. So we're estimating the construction costs. When we say construction costs, $46.6 million. That's for the building, the site, all the utilities, all in, including escalation. And we're hoping that in what's important about this number, when we hopefully pass the referendum, we go to solicit services for the architect, contractor, construction manager, they call it. We'll all be responsible for designing to that budget or under that budget. We'll have professional estimators throughout the process to test the documents as we go through to hopefully ensure we stay under that. We've been successful over many, many years and many projects as a result of that process. But it is an estimate, and we have good professionals helping us do that. But that's going to be our target, is to stay under that $46.6 million. The next section here is that furniture we spoke about. Lewis Furnishings, playgrounds, all your playground equipment that you'll see, rubberized surfacing, we've assumed. For here, we're assuming maybe 3 playgrounds. They're divided by age group. Usually pre-K, I think it's 2 to 5 year olds and then 5 to 12 year olds. But based upon, again, other projects we've had, this is the budgets we're carrying. Usually we carry a cost per student. It also includes all your data room equipment, your servers and network equipment, security equipment that's going to support the building, basically the brains of the building is included there as well. So if we scroll down just a little bit, about $2.7 million is what we're estimating for that for this here. And then as we go down for the second page, this is what we call fees and expenses. Our architectural fees, we're estimating about $3.2 million. We're hoping we've been very competitive over the last couple of years. We're hoping that'll come underneath and procure some savings there. We have a hazardous materials consultant that will help us identify any materials that have to be abated in Ryerson. And then they'll also monitor that process to make sure it's done safely by the contractor as well. That's purely for them. If you can scroll up, Wendy, a little bit more. A few other miscellaneous. We have traffic engineer, geotech, will probably be by architect. We'll have stormwater monitoring on site. The state of Connecticut requires if you disturb so many acres, you have to have a third-party monitor review all the sedimentation erosion control that's required by the law. Project management is you know, hopefully an owner's rep like ourselves to help manage the process with the district. Commissioning, building commissioning, for anybody who doesn't know what that is, it's essentially third party, again, required by the Connecticut High Performance Building requirements for the state. And they basically ensure that your mechanical, electrical, plumbing systems, the building envelope, which is the skin of the building, the roof, the windows, the walls, is constructed correctly and is operating as the design is required to. So that's just making sure it operates efficiently. For that, construction CM fees, that's construction manager fees. They help us in the pre-construction phase to estimate, but also look at the construction, the phasing, constructability, and help us keep on track there. And then the remaining ones, the expenses, owner's insurance, that's what we call builder's risk insurance. It's construction insurance. So if there's an accident, act of God, if there's a fire, that's totally by accident, it covers those. We've been, knock on wood, unfortunately, not have to enact any of those. And a bunch of other ones, materials testing, that's a separate lab, comes in, tests the concrete, tests the steel, and does inspections, the masonry, fireproofing, etc. Again, a third party entity comes in for that. And then we're carrying $1.7 million in financing costs for the bonding, short-term interest, and I think that'll be discussed, I think maybe later tonight. That's a number that's given to us by the town's finance department. And then finally, at the bottom is owner's contingency. We're carrying about $5.2 million, roughly about 7.5%. Again, that's for unforeseen conditions. We have taken some preliminary, what they call borings at the site, trying to get an idea of what's in the ground, but we don't have X-ray vision. So that's part of it. And then any other, you know, in the street as we're running the water lines, if there's ledge somewhere, a rock or something unforeseen, that's what that covers for the most part. Or if market conditions vary and it comes in over budget, that could be used for that as well. But hopefully we don't use all that, if at all any, but nature of the beast is we do. So the total of that is comes into $61,148,600. These are in thousands, just to clarify. And so that's kind of how we built the budget. That's how we built all our budgets for all our projects. This accounts for all the costs in a project and total project costs. You see at the bottom, it says hard costs and soft costs. Definition of hard costs is basically your construction costs, that building in site. All the remaining costs are called soft costs. So that's the definition of those. Wendy, can you bring up the other document for the district share?
Mr. Warrington, what we're going to do is we'll have you present this next document. We're going to do then the presentation, take our questions and answers, and then we'll come back to the other two budgets. Sounds good. Thank you.
This one will be much quicker. I apologize for that. Beautiful. So this spreadsheet is directly linked to that previous one we looked at. So hopefully we avoid any entry errors. So the 61 million is carried over. The ineligible costs, again, we're assuming a percentage. The ineligible costs are really determined by the state of Connecticut, the Office of School Construction Grants and Review. After an auditor goes through and they look at all the costs and expenses and they determine what those are. But based upon our experience, this is what we'd expect those to be, hopefully less. For those, what it results is an estimated eligible cost for the project, and it's how the state looks at it. They take that ineligible cost and they chop off the ineligibles off the top, result in approximately about $56.5 million. What we do here is at this point, this is where we start applying percentages. So the 2022 reimbursement rate for Madison for a new school is 18.21%. And that is dictated by the Department of Education. There's an angelic formula. It's a given rate. It's not negotiable. The state doesn't negotiate. It's given to us. There's a small factor you see of 95.34. So when that's a ratio of the enrollment, the 601 students, we multiply it by the factors. And what happens is if you build in addition to what that space standard calculation is, for example, is if the space standard is 90,000 square feet and we want to go build 100,000, you divide 90,000 by 100 and get 0.9. Real simple math. What we have to do is take that factor, 0.95, and multiply it by the reimbursement rate. In this case, what it does, it reduces the reimbursement rate based upon our calculations now to 17.36%. Now, there is a way there's a space standard waiver that we'll be talking with the state to hopefully get that waived and bring that back up to 18.21%. For the sake of being full disclosure and transparency, as of right now, it would be 17.36, and we want to make sure everybody understands that. We're hoping to get that back up, but that's up to the state. That's not something that we can determine at our level. So this is most restrictive, most conservative. We estimate the state based upon the 17.36% by the 56%. We estimate just under $10 million in the state of Connecticut to reimburse. That'll occur about a year after the grant application. And then ultimately, the balance of that is 51.3 million to County Madison. That's a really quick overview of reimbursement and the budget. So.
Thank you, Mr. Warrington. So Wendy, if you could bring up the presentation, please.
We should just take a moment to say, if any board members want to join the audience so they can look at the big screen, feel free. Some of us may prefer to sit in these chairs and look at that screen. Feel free to do that. Thank you all for joining us tonight.
All right. As was said already, thank you all for being here in person and those online. We will have a question and answer period after and allow you to get any questions asked, and we'll do our best to answer those. I will say we continue to have a question box on our website that you can ask any questions. We will get you an answer through email, and there's a lot of information on our website. Apologize, the screen's cutting off some of the people in the audience, but there is a lot of information on our website, so I'd encourage you to visit that often. I'm often asked, how did we get to this point? And so we wanted to review basically from fall of 2017 to present and how we got to this point, and make this slide a little smaller or a little bigger for us to chunk it. There's the first three portions of that. And so in fall of 2017, there was a failed referendum. I'm going to take my mask off and socially distance. There was a failed referendum in Madison for a new Ryerson Elementary School. And so at that point, the board looked at what was the next step forward. What did we need for our schools? Because we knew we needed quite a bit of maintenance to go forward and work on our schools. $100 million 10-year capital and maintenance plan was was developed. That plan basically looked at all of our major needs of our buildings: roofs, HVAC systems, flooring, changes that we needed to make our buildings usable over the next 10 years. And so that was a major part of that project. Looking at that, as I mentioned, it's $100 million that the total cost was. After that time, in the summer of 2018, as we start the next school year, board members questioned and began to solicit information from the public. What are our other options? So we had a failed referendum. What was our next step? What was the best way to move Madison Public Schools forward at that point? So as they went into the winter of 2018-2019, the Board of Education held public meetings and forums to collect information, talk to organizations and realtors over that time. And the group looked at over 50 options for our facilities. Basically everything you can think of. The Board of Education, the Tri-Boards group, looked at those options over that time frame. Everything from building a brand new high school to building 3 separate elementary schools. I mean, really everything that you could think of was considered at that point. We looked at narrowed it down to basically a 3, 4, or 5 school model and decided on a 4 school model ultimately in the fall of 2019, and that's where we are today. So what does this plan include? 4 really major components, 3 pieces of the project, but there's also our 4th school that does benefit from this project. So as we start, as mentioned, it was fortunate that we received that budgeting information from Mr. Warrington. We would build a new pre-K to 5 elementary school. I will show you exactly the site where that would be in a future slide. And we would convert Brown Elementary School to a K through 5. Right now it is a 4 and 5 building, but it would be a K to 5 building. So basically what we would have is we would have Brown as a K to 5 building servicing the northern part of town, and a new school to be named pre-K to 5 servicing all of our pre-K students and our K through 5 students on the southern end of town. We really have 6 schools. When we look at it, we have a preschool program that's part of our town campus learning center. It's made up of all portables. I think that was considered a temporary solution at the time, and it's now 20 years old that building has been there. But that does a great job of servicing our pre-K students. But ideally, our pre-K students would be connected with a kindergarten program and be in a building that's made for education. We would complete major renovations at Polson Middle School. So the auditorium that we're in is part of that project. We would redo the auditorium, new seats, lighting, sound, really upgrade the auditorium to be a community asset. That's a big piece that I have heard, that there's, we lack kind of that option to have a full auditorium in Madison, and this would be, a great option for that. And benefits as well, because I mentioned there's a $100 million project that went forward, and is now 20 years old, and we're getting to the point where there are needs there as well. We, for instance, this past fall, we had a HVAC unit on the roof go, and we're doing some maintenance to that. We're waiting for parts. We're doing a lot of those things. But we think of when things get about 20 years old, it's time. There are certain things that we'll have to replace and repair. And so by doing this project and removing quite a few of the items off that $100 million price tag, we're able to concentrate some more on the needs remaining at hand, and then also at Polson as well. The other pieces of the Polson project are a complete HVAC system and bringing air conditioning. So we need new electrical currents coming into the building in order to be able to do that. We don't have the electricity capabilities at this point to add air conditioning, so that's a major piece of that Polson, and that will be part of a budget review later with Mr. Warrington. So where is the preschool? Where is some details about the pre-K to 5 building? As was mentioned, it would be highly efficient building. It would have geothermal wells we're investigating, solar panels, so lots of great options for that. One thing I've heard oftentimes is the lack of gym space for our children, for outside organizations, especially during the winter months. So we would build a full-size gym for the new school. That is part of that space that's not eligible for reimbursement from the state. So a typical gym in an elementary school would be about 4,000 square feet. So not a full-size basketball court. This would be a full-size basketball court. So many of the youth programs could utilize that, out of school hours, and certainly be a great benefit to our students as they're attending there. As mentioned, 600 students, 82,000 square feet in that range. Very important to me is new school security infrastructure standards. So we're working on our existing buildings and bringing them up to additional security standards, but this building obviously would have that from the beginning. I mentioned the portables would be replaced, and we build on Mungertown Road. I want to show you that location. So as we sit here at Polson today, the original plan was the softball fields that are covered, but I think everybody's aware of where the softball fields and lacrosse, and I think it's also used for field hockey sometimes, but out there in front, that's where the new building would have gone. That was the previous plan. We were given an option to purchase this land that's covered in red here, right around the corner, basically on Mungertown Road. Lots of benefits to that. So the last time we presented the project, that was still being considered of whether we'd be able to purchase that land. And now we have a purchase agreement. The purchase agreement does not take effect unless there's a positive referendum. So if we have a positive referendum, we are able to purchase. If we have a failed referendum, we are under no obligation to purchase the land. We still could purchase the land. So the town could still decide to purchase the land even with a failed referendum, but they're not under obligation. So really excellent negotiations was done between the Board of Selectmen and Board of Ed to make sure that was possible. So obviously less disruption during the time of construction, less traffic issues that will be caused. Anybody that's had a child at Polson or Hand and picked them up or been around Green Hill area during that time, still obviously bringing families into that area, but that traffic pattern in and out of the high school and middle school can be problematic, during busy times. Also does not bring down two softball fields that are beautiful softball fields, heavily utilized during 2 to 3 school years. So we have our high school students and our youth leagues having to play in different places for quite some time. I mentioned the construction issue. The 2 softball fields, so moving the 2 softball fields is a price tag of $2 million was in the original plan. So the purchase of the land is actually less expensive than moving the 2 softball fields. The 2 softball fields were going to go to where Jeffrey School. So Jeffrey School was going to be leveled. You heard earlier that it would be actually Ryerson now that would be leveled. Jeffrey School would remain an asset. We have in Connecticut, boards of ed maintain the buildings until such time as they are no longer used as educational spaces, and we're able to turn the keys back over to the town. We don't want to do that without a lot of dialogue. We believe that Jeffrey could be a potential asset for the town for a number of uses or sale or anything down the road, but ultimately that's not a Board of Ed decision. That would be a town decision. So what happens at Brown School? So we are looking at where kindergarten and first grade classrooms would go. We believe at this point we would put those classrooms in the back wing. We would do bathroom and ADA upgrades throughout the building. We're continuing to do security upgrades now. We would continue that through this project. We know we need a furniture renewal for the library. We are in the process through the Board of Education budget of looking at it, putting in place an outdoor classroom. So Brown has just tremendous outdoor facilities around its campus, really beautiful playground and area, and we want to take advantage of that. One positive coming out of COVID is that we utilize outdoor spaces much more frequently than we had before, and we want to keep that going forward. Brown has many assets that the new school will not. So one of the questions I get asked often is, why does one area of town get a brand new building and one area of town get an intermediate school that's going to be repurposed? So there are many things in Brown School that are not going to be part of the new school. Brown has an auditorium, so Connecticut does not support an auditorium being built in an elementary school. It has a larger gym even than the new gym to be built. So there's a beautiful large gym in the building that was built for a middle school. It also has art rooms and music rooms that were built for a middle school. So it has a chorus room, it has art rooms with much more capabilities. It has a STEAM room, science, technology, engineering, arts, and math room, with STEAM. So it's got some amazing spaces for our students, and we're really excited about what the project would do for Brown School. In terms of what that would look like, so one of the things that I also get asked about is like, show me a picture of the new building. We want to see what it would look like. We purposely don't go beyond the ed specs because there's a lot of work that goes into that. So a building committee would look at that, we'd work with architectural firms to develop that, and we didn't want to bring out a picture or a plan and have people get excited about that, and then it becomes a different project or a different looking building. So we resisted showing that to you or sharing that or even having that developed, because those ed specs are really what build those. So two pieces of Brown that would happen is, so the entranceway, as you can see here, it's got a outside use, student use, and then also a safety component to it. Bollards would, decorative bollards would go in front. And then also the area, if you've been to Brown where you walk into the office, there's some space to the left of where the main entrance is that's underutilized, I would say, and it has a lot of potential. So we bring that in to use as a seating area for students. It's, really a place that a classroom could go out to, students could eat lunch outside and still maintain the sight lines from the main office out to the outside spaces. Also bringing windows down quite a bit, so we almost double the space of visible sight lines out of from the classroom. So that's an actual sight line that would occur outside the Brown classrooms after this work. In terms of Polson, I covered quite a bit of that already when I talked about the electrical renovation. Right now, 50% of the school is air conditioned. This project would bring it up to 100%. Excuse me. Auditorium upgrades I talked about. The auditorium is not air conditioned now, which makes it really not usable for about 4 months of the year for major events with a good audience. So what we also need to do is look at enrollment, and so we're pleased that as we started the school year off, as we went through the summer, we saw more students register in Madison. I think it's multi aspects to that. I think the pandemic is partly responsible for that. We know we had more families move into town. We've seen increased birth rates in Madison, and that is been going on for a few years. That's not just pandemic related, but we also know 5 years from the birth of a child, they're most likely going to be entering our elementary schools. And then also, it's just families moving into town from Connecticut or local. That is typically something that we do see. We see families move into town in Madison as their children approach school age. So in 08-09, in this projection, in this look back, we're at a high of 970. We have basically last year hit the bottom of the enrollment drop, and we're starting to see a nice kind of gradual increase, so really a manageable increase. So we're excited about that. That's the K through 3 enrollment. We're required to look at our current schools and how those look for enrollment. That's where we came up with the 600 students for the building. That's 8 years out. And as you see again in grades 4 through 5, we hit the bottom last year, and we start to see a gradual increase through that. So as we look at the numbers, out 8 to 10 years, doing nothing really does not become an option for us because of that enrollment increase going forward. We would be Right now, Ryerson is pretty much full. Jeffrey is pretty heavily utilized as well, and so we would have to make some changes if we don't go forward with this project. Cost, a lot of that was talked about in Mr. Warrington. We estimate all three pieces of the project would come out to $89 million, about $10 million reimbursed from the state. What does it result in? As I mentioned, 4 schools. This was a plan supported by the tri-boards, and it brings our average age of schools down to 35.5 years. Age of schools is not the end all be all, and certainly a well-maintained older building is perfectly capable of servicing our students. But it does help with maintenance. I wanted to show also the project financing. So what this chart shows is in red is the existing debt service. So Madison as a town does very little bonding. We've very much into paying as we go, which has been fantastic. And so there is very little bonding debt on the books. The blue is the new debt service. So that's the new debt from this project that would come on. It would not come on, until close to 5 years out, but peaks 6 to 10 years out. The green line is the 10% debt service policy from the Board of Finance. So we wanted the Board of Finance want us to keep our debt service under that line. So that's really important to show that we stay well below that one. More financial information. So what we wanted to show was that on a $100,000 assessed value, what the actual cost would be. And so I will say that this amount would not be the actual amount, because you saw the red line going down as this blue line. This represents the blue amounts. And so you can take this and look at your own individual house. If you looked at a house with, say, a $600,000 sale price, so it's about a $400,000 assessed value, to be 4 times that, or about $600 annual tax. Again, that would be offset by the expiring debt. I want to spend some time on this chart because I think it's important. As mentioned, already in place now is a CIP plan for $100 million. So we've been starting to work on that plan as we go forward. If we do nothing, that plan continues to go forward. In its place, on the left side of the chart, is the $79 million cost to the Madison taxpayers of this project. And then also $50 million would remain in the CIP. So as I mentioned, there's still projects for Daniel Hand, still projects for our remaining schools, other than the new school that would need to be completed over that time. That's why when the tri-boards looked at this, they supported the plan on the left, which was the referendum project, and then also continuing with the CIP. CIP is decided on each year. It's considered by the Board of Education for Board of Ed buildings, then the Board of Selectmen, and then ultimately the Board of Finance. And so there's a lot of work that goes into that. But there's also, as I mentioned, there's still be projects going forward, like the athletics fields and things like that, that would be part of that 50 million. So we're really looking at, a comparison of either a $100 million CIP plan or $129 million referendum and CIP plan.
What is CIP?
Oh, capital improvement projects. Yeah, thank you. So that's an annual look at projects within the town. So there's a town and a Board of Ed CIP plan that we develop each year, and we look out usually 5 to 10 years on where we pay for projects. Every year there's some.
That's an annual budget.
Yes, yeah, it happens now. Yeah. So estimated cost savings, I'll speed this up a little bit. So electrical, we would potentially save up to $100,000. Transportation, we would eliminate one school site and one different time for drop off. But based on the size of our town, we've already decreased some transportation costs over the years. We're not anticipating significant savings, so we didn't want to promise that, and we don't want to extend bus times for students. So we want to make sure we're not, adding to the time that students are already on buses. We believe it will be staffing neutral because, again, those enrollment projections are increasing. So as you looked at that, we're looking at about 20 to 25, 30 students more a year. And so we wanted to be upfront and say, most likely what would happen, we'll have some savings in certain positions when we go through this, but we'll probably be hiring elementary teachers to, address the increased enrollment. It doesn't, take away all the modulars in the modular buildings in the district. It reduces us from 6 to 4 sites. Another staffing piece I always like to point out, right now our preschool program is, the principal for that program is our special ed director. So Dr. Battaglia is the principal for that program. We also have a principal for obviously Brown and Ryerson and Jeffrey. After this project, we would have 2 buildings with 600 students in each of them. And so we would need 4 administrators for that. So we would need a principal, an assistant principal for each campus site. 600 students is a lot of students in one building. So we actually would increase an administrator, but then there would be other savings in other locations. So we just want to be upfront in that area. So we had on your way in, there was several cards. It's also on our website, why it's good for students, why it's good for teachers and staff, why it's good for the community, and why it's good for taxpayers. As I said, we were looking at reasonable ways to spend money. We know we don't receive a lot of it reimbursement from the state, but we want to make sure we maximize each of those dollars and come out with first class buildings in Madison. So where do we go from here? Also a common question. So tonight we invited the tri-boards to the meeting, and this was pushed off 2 weeks. So we thank you for showing up tonight. There's a Board of Selectmen meeting on the 22nd where the project will be discussed. We will then be in front of Planning and Zoning in December, Board of Finance in the middle of December, Board of Selectmen, coming into the new year. We're hoping that a special town meeting on February 1st will recommend a referendum for February 5th. And now we're on to questions. I thank you greatly for your patience. It was just tremendous, and so I appreciate that. Typically at board meetings, we do not have an opportunity to answer your questions. We take your information and oftentimes get back to you after. So now is a chance, and I have lots of support here to answer questions. I have Board of Ed, Bill McMinn, our facilities director, Chuck Warrington is with us, Stacy Nobitz from the finance department, and we have our bond counsel with us, and we have our elementary principals with us as well. And so we may call on everybody to join us and help out and answer to any of your questions. So, I believe Justice Rosenthal or Zoe, you gonna?
So just for the public comment portion of the meeting, so as you heard, this is a unique meeting that is a forum, so that there is an opportunity for dialogue and discussion. If you do have a question, if you're in person, we just ask that you state your name, say your address. We do limit folks to 3 minutes to make sure that everyone has time to speak. People on Zoom can raise their hand, and Wendy will call on you when the time comes. I do, if you go over time, have yellow and red note cards, when you 30 seconds, and when your time is up, so we can keep the meeting going. So is there anyone in public? Yes, sir.
First of all, that 1.3 or I'm sorry, January we're into guys. That 1.4 million for the land acquisition, is that included in the 87 million?
Yes.
So that's, I didn't see that as a line.
Oh, I'm sorry. I answered too quickly. It is not included in the 89 million. That was money to be taken out by the Board of Finance.
So where does that 1.4 million come from?
It was going to be a private appropriation because what happened, we were able to decrease the cost of the project by taking out the money to redo the fields, and we put money in there. This is not typical that the boards would necessarily consider this to level rise. So there's money in there to little Ryerson and bring it back to
Okay, so I just have one comment to make quickly, and that is, this is a whole lot of money to ask the citizens to spend. I think it's reasonable, and I think that you've done a good job putting this whole thing together. But the one thing that concerns me is that there's a second proposal coming down the line for the Academy School, which is another 10 to 15 to $20 million. And I think it's really ridiculous. And I think the Board of Ed needs to really get with the Board of Selectmen and the Board of Finance to get real on this Academy project. We can't afford 89 million and another 15 to 20 million. That's just asking the citizens way too much in this. And I feel very strongly about it.
I'm gonna go back and forth in person and online. Wendy, do you have anyone online?
I don't have any hands raised at the moment, but I do have a few questions in the question and answer box.
Okay, you want to give us one of those?
Sure. So actually, Mr. McPherson asked, is the cost of the bridges, et cetera, across the wetland between Jansen and the other schools included?
So I can handle that one. We have not put money into putting a bridge at this point. We would look at all options to connect the schools, whether it be sidewalk to around the corner or a bridge through the wetlands, but that's not a, I would say a key piece of this project. And so if we were to fund something like that, that would probably be a capital improvement project in the future.
Okay. Next question. Have you considered using Ryerson as a temporary school for a couple of years, tearing down Ryerson and building a new school on the Jeffrey lot, thus saving land purchase, water line cost, etc.?
So as I think I follow the question. We are using Ryerson in Jeffrey right now. The first project from 2017 that was not passed was to move Ryerson, on that campus. What I understand is what the board's heard loud and clear is that they want an all-encompassing project. They wanted a project that would address really all the major needs, immediate needs in Madison Public Schools, and that's what this was meant to do. That I know that was one of the considerations when they went through those 50, but we feel this is a better project because it is one build and it does not impact our students as they go through elementary schools while it's being built.
And if I understood the question correctly, Ryerson's already full to capacity, so you can't use Ryerson in a transitional role to take on additional students from Jeffrey, for example, and make it a central school for all students in those grades for a year and a half until a new building is built on the Jeffrey property. So, it's a good question, thank you, but it just, the boards considered that a couple of years ago and it was deemed impractical.
All right, we have a question in person. Yes, sir, in the back. Sorry, I'll get to it later. Yes, you. Yes, you, sorry.
We've all seen the cost of lumber skyrocket. The $2 2x4 is now 12. The $10 sheet of plywood is now 50 or 60. Are we hoping this is going to subside when the contractor starts buying lumber for this job?
So we've had lots of those discussions. And we've actually talked with our friends in Mansfield. And Mansfield recently went out for a referendum on a very large elementary school. It was 800 students plus. They actually were lower than their estimated cost. So I believe as we look at construction that they are believing, we look at 5 years out, that by the time they're completing the project, that the cost will come down to maybe, closer to where it is. There is escalation in there. It's a great question. We've had that discussion, quite often as we go through. One thing that's also been told to us too is because it's a clean site, because it's by itself, that it'd be very attractive to someone, doing that build.
My request, you mentioned a treatment system. What mentioned what you treat? This is the sewage?
There would be a, yes, as part of the project.
Is that one of these denitrification things that come up there?
No, I think it's just a typical septic. That was part of Mr. Warrington's presentation. Am I correct on that? Chuck? Yes.
You mentioned separately when they talked about treatment requiring an operator.
Okay. Yeah.
I'm just curious.
Like,
Bill McMahon, I'm the director of facilities. You have a treatment plant on this site, and we do have an operator. So yes, it would be something you would, but it's a sophisticated septic system.
Okay. I'm familiar with this. Okay, thanks.
How much land do you need for that treatment center?
So right now, the one on this site, which is much bigger than the one we're proposing for the new location, is on the Jansen field that we have right now. The leaching fields are under the field. It probably takes a third of the fields, and then the rest is underneath the parking lot, and you can see the little building that has the equipment in it. So it's underneath, fields and parking. So how much area would be? Maybe an acre,
Oh,
approximately an acre.
Thanks. Rick here on 63 Liberty Street. Is there any way to go back to a couple of the
there is
slides?
absolutely.
So there was a slide that showed the school population, and it was sort of actual numbers versus what looked like a dashed line of projected numbers.
This was the one that's K through 3.
Okay, I don't know if there's one that was all encompassing, but
There is on our website, the full report is on our website. For tonight, we were showing that K through 3 and 4 through 5.
so both of those, as I look at the solid line, which is the actual numbers, show a really distinct trend, which is a decline. And the dotted line shows a very rosy picture of things sort of leveling and increasing. And as a resident here, born 55 years ago in our neighboring town, Guilford, but here for 13 years, I've certainly experienced what's going on with the solid line, which is as taxes have increased pretty dramatically, it's a real burden on a lot of families here in town. And this is a very, very large number. $100 for the first 5 years for every $100,000 of house, $500,000 house, $500 of taxes, and then that doubling in the next 5 years to $1,000 of taxes for the $500,000 house. What gives us confidence that doing this actually leads to increases in numbers of students, because small families, starting families have difficulty, kind of absorbing that kind of tax rate.
Right. Oh, great question. I'm happy to have a larger conversation with you offline if you want to contact the office. The full report is online on our website. This is based on many factors. I'm going to focus on the K to 3 in answering that. So what they look at is the number of houses being built in town. We know it's a relatively mature town, but there are some housing developments going up. So they look at that. One of the major things they look at is birth rate. And so when we were seeing the 602, there was 94 births in Madison. What happens in Madison, because of the attractiveness, I think, of the town and of the educational system, is that more families move in after their children are born. And it also makes sense too, as you mentioned, the cost of housing in Madison, that it may not be someone's first home, it may be a second home. But there were 136 births last year. And so we pick up a larger percentage. And so when we see 94 turning into about 150 preschool, or 150 kindergarten students, we're expecting that 134 to turn into closer to 200 kindergarten students as as they come up. Remember, we have closed the school in town, and so, I think that the board has been very judicious in watching costs and looking at things and realized quite a bit of savings when we did close Island Ave and go to 2 schools. And so this would as well, kind of reduce our footprint and make more efficiencies going forward.
So the 970 back in 0809, declining 30% to 600 this past year, you attribute that to a decline in birth rates since that time, or what do you attribute the decline to historically? Because it sounds like you're projecting a really rosy picture based on birth rates, where one might argue, irrespective of birth rates, the tax rate that's become, sort of stifling is maybe led to this decline.
So definitely a decline in birth rates. I think also Madison has a large number. We recognize this also during the pandemic when we looked at the number of children in certain age bands or citizens in age bands. There's a lot of houses in Madison that their children are in college. So those are expected at, within 10 years typically to turn over. Their youngest child is in college. There's a large number of 18 to 27 in that band, but absolutely a decline in birth rate. And just to make the point, these are not my projections. These are from a firm that uses formulas. I've been involved with districts before where we've been projected to continue to decline. And in fact, when Madison did this projection years ago, it was a continual decline. Like there was not the rebound that you see. And so, this is a formula that's utilized by the state. We would do this normally. It helps us in planning for education. But in terms of being able to apply for the grant through the state, we have to look 8 years out. And so that's the point in time when the state looks at our enrollment and says, that's what we believe you're going to be at. And that's what you can build buildings off of and do those projections. So there's a lot of pieces that go into that, beyond. And, again, if it was continuing to decline or if it leveled off completely, we'd be sharing that with you as well, and maybe looking at a smaller building to build. One piece on the finances, because I hope I didn't present that. Those are through the bands. That is not a continual increase. And so in years 11 through 15, the average is $189. It does not, add on to the 202 or the 96. It just shows, because of the way we do the bonding, it peaks and then it goes down. And so bonding rates are very favorable now, and it is a good time to try and take advantage of that. We're able to do that. Yes.
The company, we had a presentation from the company regarding the projections of enrollment, and I think it was during when everything was Zoom, so we might actually have that.
There is a
recorded.
yes.
That was on our April 6th board meeting, so that goes into great detail about the projections and the enrollment report with the consultant. So that was the April 6th meeting, I believe.
So I have 2 more questions, but I don't want to monopolize. Should I sit down and ask later? Or, so it's just the big picture of, it seems our tax revenues, the town collects about $90 million among all of us. We give to things that we think are important. And of that 90 million, about 60 million, 59 million, I think, is for the schools. So almost 70 cents, 67 cents in every dollar of taxes we pay towards the schools. So we're spending about $60 million on the schools, and we're contemplating slapping on 90, maybe $80 million of debt, and hoping that we extend out the amortization, repaying it well into the future, so our children and grandchildren get to bear that burden so that we can afford it. And it does seem like we're doing this on a federal basis, certainly statewide. but burdening our children with something that is a really big number. And it does sound like back in 2019, there were 50 options considered, which hats off to all of you that looked at 50 different options. I think that was thoughtful, important. And one of those, I think at the time, was maybe consolidating schools. Maybe Madison and Guilford got together, and we both had declining populations. We're both similar in culture, socioeconomic similarities. We don't always agree on the sports field, but we like each other. At the end of the day, we're like brothers and sisters. And that just seemed to me like a really smart thing with both towns facing declining populations. We're projecting something different from what we've seen since those numbers went back to 08, 09, but it's been a straight line down. And that just seems like of those 50 options back in 2019, really the most sensible. Like, how do we both save our towns, stop driving out families that have been here for generations that can no longer afford it, and really start addressing some costs. And I just wonder if that's completely off the table at this point. Have we just charged forward sort of headlong into this $70, $80 million additional burden on our children and grandchildren? For those of us who want this to be our home, I want to spend the rest of my life here. I hope my children come back and visit, and try to be a good parent. But is there not another path that is, I can see the time and effort that's been put into this, but it just seems like there's a big game-changing possibility here that we didn't take that path. And I was a little late to the meeting, so I didn't hear all the discussion. But to me, that idea of thinking big and bold, like, how do we make both of these towns, these great towns, Guilford, Madison, attractive places to live, and not add another $1,000 of taxes on the average home? Maybe it's 800, whatever it is, in years 6 through 10, at 100,000 per home, per $100,000 a home. If you have $500,000 home, that goes up to $200 in years 6 to 10. I mean, it's a big number. So, and I don't think that's amortizing the $80 million either. Like, at some point, that's got to be repaid. So, I was late, so I apologize. If there was some discussion about that, I'd love to just, if you could quickly sort of encapsulate that or provide a summary of like why we went this direction instead of this idea that I heard Christine Cohen, who's our state senator, talk about early on. Is that still?
I think I could, after last board members to help out. That, first of all, Stacy, correct me if I'm wrong, those costs up there include paying back the loan and the interest costs. Yes, so I just want to be clear on that. That is the full cost. I'm not aware of any ongoing discussions with combining with any school district, whether it's Killingworth, Guilford, or Clinton, or anywhere else. I know the state has looked at that several times. I'm sure there's been local discussions as well, but the state has abandoned that as recently. I think there are some potentials. I think there are some school districts that probably consider that. I don't know if our size necessarily makes us the ones that should consider that first, but I don't know that there's also the cost savings that they have put out there in certain areas when they talk about combining that, because the biggest cost of education is really the teacher in the classroom with the students, and the supports in the classroom, and that would still maintain. There would, obviously there's sufficiencies, and that's what we're trying to do here by going from 6 schools to 4. But in terms of those projects when they talked about that in the past. I'm not sure that there's the savings that there has been. And Liz,
Yeah, we have a bunch of questions in the chat too.
Okay.
So maybe answer.
I know this woman's been trying to.
Yeah, well, been waiting here patiently, but listening to what everybody's saying, and it's all really great, I think the comments. I just have a comment and a suggestion about the efficiencies, the operating costs. I think we need to do this for the schools, but really the big concern is the rise in operational costs year over year, despite the declining enrollment. So the enrollment has gone down significantly, yet the cost of the operations of the school system has gone nothing but up. And even when we closed Island Avenue School, I think everybody was promised $1 million in savings. Didn't happen because it was reallocated to new staff. So my suggestion really is to get this thing passed, sit down and figure out the operational efficiencies and what the taxpayers are going to save by going from the 6 schools, because I'm counting Island, 6 schools down to 4 schools, right? If you're telling me they're staff neutral, I can't believe how that could be, because you've got staff that operates the school, not just teachers.
Right.
So there's got to be staff efficiency. Niche came out with something that said we have 11-to-1 student teacher ratio. That's crazy to me. I mean, with these costs constantly going up, we just can't sustain that as a town. So despite all of this, the operational costs are really the concern. And how do we really brainstorm ways like maybe combining some things with Guilford, maybe some special services? I don't know. We got to start thinking out the box on how do we kind of, quell these increases that keep happening every year. It's always contractual obligations. That's what we hear. That's why we need the increases. But an 11-to-1 student to teacher ratio, do we take this opportunity maybe to make that 12-to-1 or 13-to-1? When I was in school in New York City school system, we had 25 kids in the class, and no paraprofessionals. We all became pretty successful, most of my friends. So I'm just thinking, how much is too much, right? Everybody wants what's best for the kids, and we do, I do too. But how much is too much? When do we start saying what's best for the taxpayers of Madison? And when do we start saying, let's show some efficiencies in the operating costs that are going to come out of this, and let's put that up there so that when people vote for this or against this, they can see some real savings, and they can see that all you guys are committed to getting some efficiencies out of this. So staff neutral, I don't buy that. I don't think it needs to be that way. I think we can really take this opportunity to say, what can we give back to the taxpayers in order to get this thing passed? And that's really a strong suggestion, because I feel like they need something. We need something to say, hey, this is what you're going to save from this project. Energy costs, staffing costs, administrative costs, a lot of duplication eliminated. So that's just a suggestion.
Sure.
And my question is, how is the bid process going to work? Is it going to be a one construction overall general contractor that then chooses all the subs that do all the different, elements, the heating and the HVAC, the roofing, all that? Or is each thing going to be bid separately? How is that going to work? And who from the town of Madison is going to be the project manager on this to see it through from beginning to end?
I'm sorry, can we just get your name and address, please?
Oh, sure, Janet, community 8 Madison.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, please. I'm going to call on Bill McMinn.
So again, I'm Bill McMinn, I'm Director of Facilities. I've been through a few of these projects. The Board of Selectmen will appoint a building committee, and they will manage the project. They will make those decisions on how they manage the project, whether they do a construction management, general contractor, owner's rep. So those decisions haven't been made, but they will be made by building committee.
How does that get selected? Because I have a procurement sourcing procurement background. So I've done bidding, I've done contracting, done all that. How does one get on that committee and how do they select people? Are they people with experience?
So the board of selectmen, make the appointment. So the board of selectmen, and I can't say that I know how people get on the committee because the board selects them. Maybe there's some board members here now, board of selectmen who will help me out, but they make the selection. So, I see one right there.
So, so correct me if I'm wrong, but once we get this through referendum, this then becomes a town project. The district is consulting on it, but as a construction project, the town owns it and controls that process moving forward. We would, just like we did a committee for the library, we would seek applications. So we would send an email. If you happen to know the phone number to a selectman, you might call him or her and say, hey, I'd like to be on that. I'd like to be considered for it. And we'll look to draw, as we always do, on the tremendous wealth of expertise that we've got in the community to make sure that we do this correctly.
Do you have any experience from how other districts have done bills that, I don't know that it's entirely accurate that the Board of Selectmen impanels or oversees the building committee if it's a Board of Ed building?
Yeah, so there's a slight difference. Familiar with the library. For Chuck Warren, Collier's project leaders right here in Madison. I lead our K-12 group. So on the school projects, it is correct, it's a town project. So the building committee, it's kind of two parts. Board of Education, they own the educational specifications that cannot be changed by the building committee or anybody in town. The Board of Education owns it. The superintendent and the Board of Ed are the signatories with the state of Connecticut for the grant. So that body wants to talk to the superintendent. That's who their contact is. But the budget and the oversight of the contractors, architects is by the building committee. Just to clarify in the selection process, there's for architects and contractors and professionals, it's a quality-based selection process. It's not lowest qualified responsible bidder. So we'll do an RFP, solicit qualifications. That building committee will whittle it down to no more than 4 firms in their respective category, and they can interview those. Just to clarify that process there. And when it goes out to bid, whether it's general contractor or construction manager delivery system, it's lowest qualified responsible bidder, and that's governed by state law.
Yeah, I think if we can get some questions, Wendy, I know there's a bunch of questions coming up online for us.
Sure. So actually, the next question in the chat was from Tina Phelan, and she actually has 2 questions. The first question being, will the new school take on the name of one of the current schools? And then she is questioning elementary projections show 638 children for K through 3 for this year. And she's asking how close we are to that number.
So the piece on the naming of the school, that becomes a Board of Ed function that would be discussed, I think, as we go through that process. In terms of the enrollment, we are basically there, and we have updated. We're just in the process of finalizing a new projection, and it actually is a little bit steeper than what we're seeing. Not significantly changing, but it is a little higher than what we're seeing in terms of projection. So we were pretty much right at that projection. And we should be, 1 year out, that's typical that you're gonna hit that. But the new projections will be shared soon with the board. We're just finalizing those.
Is that 400 students in each grade or 400 for the whole K through 5?
Yeah, this chart in particular is 4 and 5. So that's grades 4 and 5.
So how many students altogether?
K through 5. I would have to get that for you. Correct. We're basically at 2,500 in the district, pre-K to 12.
So 2,500. So out of the school is 600.
We would have 2 schools servicing K through 5, basically.
So
Brown School. 1,200 in a roughly in a K through 5. 2,500 for the whole district.
High school,
Polson,
the whole district.
I just said 2 through K through 5.
That's what you asked, but I answered as it's being calculated. I said pre-K to 12 is 2,500. Yeah, but in the K to 5 range, there'd be 2 schools.
So what years are you talking about for K through 5?
I believe you're asking for current.
Current? 2022, we have, I had it, sorry. K through 3 is 638, and 4 and 5 is 334, so roughly. Yeah. Yeah. Or 5,000.
Dr. Cook, do you want to take one more question online and then come back in person?
Sure.
Wendy, is there another question online?
Yes, so we do have a number of questions in the chat, and the next question is from LM. There's no name, only initials. The question is, you closed Island because of low enrollment, and now you want to spend $79 million for a new school with the anticipation of an influx of kids. Why not upgrade what we have and get Island back and fix Academy?
All right, everyone's looking at me. So I wasn't here at the time. Okay.
Yeah.
Once again, Bill McMahon, I'm Director of Facilities. I was here when we did the 50 different studies. And I just think the economics, the size of Island Avenue wouldn't fit the 600 kids. The cost to do Academy's been closed since 2004. And the building was built in 1936. So you can imagine the cost of renovating that for the school. So it's really the size of the site and the condition of the building was the factor that the committee at that time decided that those weren't viable options.
And I do know there was a push to have plans for our buildings in place as we move forward, and that was something we wanted to do through this plan. That's why I wanted to share that tonight.
We'll come back in person for another question. Yes, Wilson.
So, once again, 45 Dairy Hill South. So I'd like to talk about Ryerson and Jeffrey. So the plan includes demolishing Ryerson and returning it back to a field essentially. Does the district plan on keeping that and maintaining it as a school asset, or do you expect to turn it over to the town?
I think that would be, in conversation, what other uses we could have as a school. We have certainly plenty of space around Brown to accommodate our needs. We just would want to be certainly, a player at the table for that conversation in terms of what that would be. But
So
land itself.
same question with Jeffrey. Plan does not include demolition for Jeffrey. So I expect you're just planning to either hang on to the building and hold it in reserve, or do you plan to turn that over?
I think ultimately that's a board discussion at that point. I think we have to see where enrollment is, but we have those discussions with the town ongoing as well. I think ongoing through the time of the rest of the time we're using it.
So just in the spirit of getting taxpayers sort of all of the transparency to all the moving parts, we probably want to arrive at some conclusion and consensus amongst the boards about what's going to happen to those properties. Do you currently have any working plans to utilize the combined Lesage Jeffrey property post construction?
No, we don't. There hasn't been discussion that we would need it at this point.
question person number 1.
I'm Charles Lieberger, 32nd Kimberly Lane. I've lived in Madison since the 1970s, sent 3 of my children through K-12, great school system. I always vote yes for the school budget every time, and I can't support enough for education. Best thing we can spend our money on. I'm a little concerned about a couple of things. One is sort of concentrating all our schools at one point in Madison. When I moved to town, we had schools downtown, we had schools on Green Hill, and we had schools up north. And now it seems like we're just concentrating everything in one spot. When I moved to town, we had 6 schools with less students, and now we have 5, and we're going to 4 schools. And I'm a little concerned that we're spending a lot of money to go down to 4 schools, with one of them being brand new. And then the way things are changing, it's a very fluid situation with all the people moving into town. And I think our birth rate's going up with all the new people and the number of people coming in. That after we do all this, we might realize we're really strapped for space and we have to build another school. So my concern is maybe we shouldn't close Ryerson, shouldn't close Jeffrey. Maybe we should consider building a new school. Maybe not in one central location, but maybe up north. Maybe Ryerson could be replaced in the field next to Ryerson, the brand new school. When that's all done, then we level Ryerson and turn it into a parking lot or another field. But we maintain at least 2 locations in town for our schools. That's my point. One last thing is that we're planning a referendum February 15th. Last week we had an election with 50% turnout. A year earlier, we had 90% turnout. On a referendum, we're going to get like 22, 23% if we're lucky. I think it's the biggest expenditure we've ever had in Madison. And we need everyone to participate in town. We've got to sell the people on the plan for whatever it is. So is there any possibility that we could study the fluid situation, what people coming in town, and move this till next year?
I can answer a couple of those pieces. I know that was a project they looked at, that the referendum that failed in 2017 was very similar to the project you're talking about with Ryerson. So that has been considered. In terms of the boards have looked at this for a number of years. This is not something that has really been quick to get to this point of a vote. And so I think that there's been a lot of consideration for that. And then in terms of the location of the schools, so what I would say is if we were starting brand new with no locations, I would want my middle school and high school close to each other so they can utilize some of the same staffing and services. I think that's a huge asset that we have. We could have 8th graders taking classes at the high school, getting high school experiences a little ahead of time, taking advanced classes. So I think there's a huge benefit to that. Yes, I think there's some benefit to having things spread out, but we're a unique sized town where it takes so long to get from the south end to the north end. I think it's maybe not the best, but I think it's a good situation. I really wish we could do something about the traffic. There's a lot of traffic, and certainly is the case. But I think we're in a good position. When we come out with this project.
The only thing I would add to that is since December of 2013, I believe it was, with Sandy Hook, the state and certainly our district have all taken a long look at security interests and having consolidated campuses. We've had some input from the police department. Having consolidated campuses increases our ability to protect and secure the school district buildings. So, they have 2 patrol cars in 2 different locations instead of having to have 3 or 4 when you've got a bunch of separate campuses. So this consolidation, to the gentleman who spoke earlier also, I think one thing that we need to keep in mind as perspective is that the board over the last 5-6 years has been really concerned, as you pointed out, with the tax impact. And you can't have that discussion outside of also bearing the perspective of what you gain from consolidating buildings. And also the fact that if we take a big step and we do something bold and we do a plan that will get us, that will take our average age of our buildings down so dramatically, there's also an offsetting basis for taxes. And we're also kind of considering a tax impact on a more temporary basis. Yes, it's over a, mostly a 10-year horizon when you're really feeling it. But then the argument comes in that, do we have a responsibility as a town, as stewards, even though our kids, like my kids may be out of school by then, and won't get the direct benefit of the new buildings or the upgraded and enhanced buildings. But at the same time, my property value will stay high and the town will remain vital. And we'll continue to see increasing, bucking the trend of the state, we'll continue to see increasing numbers of students, families with student-aged children come here because it's such an attractive town. So I think you have to kind of recognize, I'm asking that folks recognize that all three of the boards, the tri-boards working together, have been working very hard to consider all of these things. And it's hard, but we have to train ourselves, I think, as a matter of perspective, to not only look at the tax impact, but also look at the value and the quality that a plan will deliver. And then finally, we can't, in a vacuum, look at the price without also recognizing the alternative, which is $100 million, which gets us nowhere. Over 10 years, we're just fighting the same battle with even older buildings. So.
Should we go online for a couple?
Sure. Wendy, any questions?
Yes, so the next in line, Mr. McPherson has had his hand raised for quite some time. I'm going to promote him to a panelist. Trying to promote him to a panelist. I think he may have put his hand down. Okay, so the next person, we have Matt Gordon. I'll promote him now.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. I did not necessarily mean to be admitted to this august body as a panelist, but I did have a clarification on some discussion that was raised earlier, having to do with the temporary use of Ryerson as an elementary school. That after Brown has been changed over to being the K-5 school and taking the students that presumably are in Ryerson right now, and Ryerson is empty, and before it gets torn down, could that maybe then serve as the temporary elementary school for the students from Jeffrey for a couple of years, while Jeffrey gets demolished and the new school built on the Jeffrey site, thereby avoiding having to buy the Jansen property with all the water hookups that you mentioned, the possible bridges across the not insignificant wetlands, et cetera, saving $2 or $3 million off the whole project, and still ending up with a new school on what is now the Jeffrey property. So I'm wondering if that juggling act has been considered.
So, Mr. McPherson, as I understand your question, you're asking, you would have a project that would have an extra school though that we're proposing. We are proposing.
No.
Actually, I'm sorry. What they would move to Brown? Okay, I got you. I'm sorry.
So there would not be
yes.
a school. We would not buy the Jansen property.
Okay.
The downtown elementary school, instead of being a newly built one on the Johnson property would be a newly built one on what is now the Ryerson property.
The quick answer to that would be that the students in Jeffrey would not fit into the Ryerson campus. The Ryerson is a smaller school, and there's more students at Jeffrey at this time. There could be some other movement, but it would require quite a few moves, I think, for a boundary line. And I'm not sure that we could be able to do that.
But we did look at redeveloping Jeffrey School. That was part of one of the 50 things that we looked at. And we could not put a school of this size on the Jeffrey School site. It's too small. We could put a new school on the Ryerson site and the Jeffrey site, building 2 new schools. That was one of the proposals. And the one that got turned down was a new school at Ryerson and renovating Jeffrey. That's what was not successful at the last referendum.
Thank you.
Want to take one more online and then come back in person?
Sure, yeah.
Oh, sorry.
When is one more?
Yes, Mr. Gordon.
Hi, everyone. Matthew Gordon, 34 Lenore Drive. Two questions, one for Dr. Cook and one for Mr. Warrington. Dr. Cook, I just want to make sure that we think about the statistics that you're putting up here with the rates of students coming in. You know, I would just, it's nice to hear that there might be a Zoom that was recorded that talks about, you know, the methodology of this. I just would like to make sure that the methodology takes into account a post-pandemic phase. I mean, we've seen a lot of families coming in. We've seen a lot of growth. A lot of people are still working from home, and that can lead to more pregnancies. But I just want to make sure that we are anticipating for the future. And so we just want to go back and do due diligence to make sure that that's all taken into account. And then for Mr. Warrington, if we, with a new plan for the school, is there the thought that if we had to expand or if we had to grow that school in the future, would we have those capabilities? Is that being taken into consideration?
So to answer that, typically, we're not in the design phase yet, but once in some of the very recent projects we've been working on with growing districts, the one thing we do look for is an option to expand a school and design it, you know, with like a dash line, and be able to design the utilities within the building, the mechanicals, your boilers, et cetera, to expand to potentially 4 new classrooms, maybe 6 new classrooms with the site, and try to have that flexibility. So if we add on to it, kind of like adding on to our house, it looks like it was kind of planned all the time. That will be, hopefully if we pass referendum, that'll be part of the process when we select our architect and start going to our site selection options for the proposed building with the building committee. So the answer is yes, we'll be looking at that.
Great, thank you.
We'll go back in person now. Go ahead. Okay, go ahead, behind you.
Do we have someone in the audience, Emily? I'm not hearing anyone at the moment.
result is a thoroughly researched and financially responsible plan. Our school infrastructure needs require money to remediate the many problems we have. The school renewal plan is the best use of our tax dollars. If you haven't already met up with us in the lobby, you can do so afterwards. And for people online, if I'm being heard, I'm not even really sure. You can contact us at our email. It's contact@supportmadisonCTschools.com. And I can give that to Wendy or that's people are asking for that. Thank you very much.
Yes, go ahead, sir.
More so comments than anything. Just to echo, I'm sorry, Nick Conti, 295 Warpus Road. Just to echo what she said, it's clear you all put a lot of time and effort into this. And whether we're for it or against it, I applaud the effort and dedication. I think that needs to be said. Cost is obviously, as expected, the biggest concern. And I get that, nobody in here is cheaper than me. But I really appreciate the gentleman's comment about not burdening our students, or I'm sorry, burdening our kids with this debt. And again, I fully understand that. I think though, when you look at the alternative of that $100 million capital improvement plan over 10 years, even if it's 90 million, this is still the right way to go. And I say that as somebody who doesn't want my taxes to go up one nickel year over year, and I expect it not to go up year over year stupidly, right? But I think it's the right investment. It's not, while we may be burdening the debt, I think we're setting our students up, our children up better in the future. And as the father of a 1 and 4-year-old, my wife and I moved to Madison before we had kids for this reason, for the schools that you all have here, that we have here. And I think this just enhances the desire for people to want to be here and to want to stay here. So, thank you.
Yes.
Hi, Nancy Harris, 14 Willard Avenue. I want to thank you all because clearly there's been so much work that's gone into this. And I think for me, this is very reminiscent of when my husband and I moved here and we have 3 children and we were going through these conversations to approve or not approve the building of the high school and how that back and forth went. But one of the things that was very, has struck me, especially now post-COVID, is the conversation then about the fluctuation in enrollment. So I totally have always believed that investing in our schools and our education, it elevates the town, it elevates our home values, but I do worry about the accuracy of the projections because I'm assuming that most of this was done pre-COVID. And what I've seen, birth rates aside, there are so many young families with little kids that have moved here from New York. And I've commented a number of times, just sort of offhand, oh my gosh, like what are we gonna do in 6 years when all of these kids are school age? So my concern is more the accuracy of assuming that we have a 200 student per class about average is what this says to me. And I'm coming from a family whose children's classes were over 300. So I am concerned, and someone else said that. So how do we really know that? And what is the, I would be concerned that we're going to move forward with a project that we're going to outgrow. And so is there something in place for that? Because I'm very skeptical about, I think this isn't rosy enough, the projections. I personally think they're going to be even higher when you just look at typical demographic fluctuations, but you know, kids in college and people moving out of town and what is a normal fluctuation. And I think we need to really look at what's COVID, what has that done to our community in terms of little kids moving into town. Thank you.
Wendy, you want to read the next question?
Yes, in the chat box, Laura Francis has a comment. She feels it would be better to make Brown a 3 to 5 school and the new elementary school to be pre-K to 2 for a variety of reasons. Is there time to reevaluate the grade structure proposed to elementary schools K through 5? I put in detail my reasons in an email that she sent.
Can I address something? I'd like to touch on that because that was the original plan that the tri-board working group kind of was considering as its like first group plan. But then the tri-board working group received a lot of input from parents up north who were concerned that they had many concerns that were expressed about the amount of time their youngest kids would be on buses coming from Dorset down to a centralized campus for or centralized school for pre-K to kindergarten age, first grade, second grade. They might be on the bus for 45 minutes. There were other concerns about equity. There were there were a bunch of concerns understandably expressed by parents in the northern part of town. And again, exacerbated by the elongated 13-mile high shape of our town. And so the tri-board working group kind of eschewed that first plan in favor of a more considered plan, which is the current plan. And that current plan is not only more equitable to families up north, but it also takes into account some of these real hardships that plan that you just recommended in the chat, then that plan presented. So thank you very much. You came up with a plan that we did originally consider, and it was the favored plan until we heard and took more advice and counsel from the folks up north and tried to make things more equitable and reduce seat time and bus time and other things.
And I'll be happy to share that email with the board. I believe that was stated that there was an email sent, so thank you.
It sounds like Dr. Cook, we just have online one more comment.
Okay.
One more hand.
Okay, Wendy?
Yes, so in the chat box from Christine Maizano, her comment reads, typically geothermal systems are cost prohibitive and valued engineered out of the projects. What other highly efficient systems are you considering as alternatives?
Ask Chuck to answer that, or Bill?
So once again, Bill McMinn, the Director of Facilities, I'm happy to answer that. The question is geothermal versus the high efficiency systems that we're looking at. We're going to look at both. There's no decisions made. That will be part of the building committee's review and decision once we get to that point. We just put the funding in to consider both in the budget. So no decisions have been made. If we do not do geothermal, we would definitely do a very high efficient building. It'll be by high efficiency and meet today's standards, which will. I think the difference between high efficiency green and high efficiency gas units. So that's the difference in the geothermal is the green, the renewable.
We've done some investigation of both geothermal, visited schools that have geothermal, and also where schools have very new high efficiency systems.
I'm going to let someone have a turn with closing it off. Okay? Yes, go ahead.
My name's Ronnie Mellon. I live at 24 Lenore Drive. I first want to say thank you to all the members of the boards who have volunteered their time, because this is a volunteer position and you're spending your time listening to the community. And I also applaud you for coming back after the failed referendum to try and solve this problem, because it could have been a situation where you said, well, we're just not going to focus on this, but you've come back, and I applaud that. I guess I do want to just talk a little bit about, what our kids go through. Right, because they don't have a voice in this. They don't get to vote, right? We as taxpayers, so someone talks about the taxpayer, you got to think about the taxpayers. The taxpayers get to decide, right? We all get to vote. People who pay the tax don't have to do that, but our kids don't. But they get to go to school without air conditioning. They get to use products and supplies and structures that are several years old. Like it's way older than I am, like Ryerson, when my kids goes to school. And this idea that like somehow we don't focus on that the maintenance costs are gonna go down. I can only imagine, and I would love to hear your thoughts on what the costs are to maintain the buildings that are 60 years old and how they continue to go up. And if we get rid of that maintenance cost that goes into Ryerson and put it to a new school, because I know I have an older car, my wife has a newer car, and my car requires a lot more maintenance than her car. And I gotta think buildings are the same thing. So I'd love for you to provide a little bit of information for us to better understand the maintenance costs of some of these really old schools. Thank you.
You want me to answer that? So,
What are the costs to maintain Ryerson?
so Ryerson is a small school. It has no air conditioning.
Yeah.
So it's the quality of the facility versus, let's say, the high school or ground school that has 100% air conditioning.
Yeah.
So when you have 100% air conditioning and ventilation, you get more ventilation, you get today's standards. It definitely costs more to heat and air condition versus just heat. So it's the quality of the facility too. So there's no doubt about it. For the example, this building is half air conditioned. The units are older, very difficult to get. When things break, when they're older, we can't maybe fix them quick. They take longer to get, they're harder to fix. So it's not just the cost, it's the maintenance and taking care of them and the quality of the service that we can provide. A newer unit that breaks, you get the part, it comes pretty quickly. Well, it used to come pretty quickly. It's very difficult to maintain and repair older buildings and get the parts that don't exist. We really have to retrofit them.
So would it be expected that those costs, if we don't do that, that's just gonna continue to go up? Because the older they are, the more the costs they are. Is that the right way to think about it?
The costs will go up, yes, and the quality of fixing them and making them whole is very difficult to quantify as well. So it's the cost and the quantification of what's acceptable. I mean, you're in this building right now, you're looking at these old chairs and seats, and it's the quality of the stuff that you have to quantify as well.
Bill, it's true that we had to source a part, a boiler part on eBay. We got it from Jakarta, correct?
So yes, the rooftop units here were very difficult to get this one motor part. So my vendor found 10 of them. So he bought them on eBay so we could have spares because you can't find them. So it's just a common, older buildings, older parts are very difficult to get. So it's the service too, when things go down. I can't quantify. My job is to keep the schools heated and air conditioned so the kids can learn. If it's broken and not working, they're not happy, they're not learning. So that's a really, quantifier that's hard to describe,
And just even one further than that, Bill, I know that you've been involved over the years when something breaks down unexpectedly. One of my first years on the Board of Ed, I think it was like 2008, one of the boilers blew out at Highland Avenue School, and it was $125,000 for the part. We had to wait months for it. I believe it was in the winter, because thank God we had another boiler there that we could run. And it ended up costing a lot more than that because you also had to pay for the serve, for them to come and do the removal and installation of the new boiler. And all of that had to be voted on in an emergency, was it an emergency appropriation or whatever?
That was a very, the boiler at Island that we don't own anymore, we replaced them. Had a failure, a major failure, and it is encompassed with asbestos. So it didn't get into the building, but it could have. The insurance company wanted me to fix it. I'm like, fix it? You know what I mean? It's almost the building. So it was very difficult to replace it and then, handle the asbestos abatement and then get the school up and running. We have 2 boilers for that reason, so we went along until the summer. We could, fix it. We went for the special appropriation, got the money. So that's just one of the examples of the old parts and very difficult to fix and maintain.
And when you have a plan in place with newer buildings, you can smooth out those emergency breakdowns and have more, ideally, theoretically, have a more smooth tax implication, even though you may be paying more in taxes for a few years.
We have just one more hand online. Is that right, Wendy?
Yes, we do have one more person with their hand raised, Laura Francis. Laura, if you're there, can you please unmute yourself?
Hi, sorry about that. I hope my baby won't be crying while I'm trying to talk. I had my question before. Thank you guys for answering it. I just don't know that I had a clear answer. So is the grade level model staying? Like we're voting on that? That is a done deal. And the reason I'm asking is because I actually timed it the other night going to vote, and it's 5 minutes from Jeffrey to Brown. So I just don't know that that's really doing much for the people up north in terms of a commute for the many positives of, the pre-K to 2 model, as well as the 3 to 5 model. It's 5 minutes is my point. So I just don't know, if that reasoning is enough and if there's an opportunity to go back and look, because I also think when this model was created was when Jeffrey had just gotten rid of the 4th grade and it had gone to Brown. So I think people were also nervous about having their kids, they wanted them in a lower elementary school. And I think now, after seeing how great that's turned out with the 4th and 5th at Brown, people might have a different opinion. So I was just, and then also as a teacher myself, in terms of collaboration, communication with all the grade level teachers in one building, a united PTO, I think there's just so many benefits to that. So I was just wondering, is this done, or is there time to go back and look at it?
I mean, part of, yeah, we have had, and this is one of the things I want to thank everyone again for being here this evening, for taking the time to come. For those of you online, the millions of you, I'm sure that there are online. I'm hoping it's very helpful to all of the boards and commissions in town when we have people's participation, and there has been an incredible amount of process, open process, forums just like this that have gone on over the last 8 years, really, since the very beginning of the Board of Ed and the other boards in town trying to look at our school facilities and planning for the future and facing, precipitous drop in student enrollment and all of that stuff, and aging buildings. And there's been many years, and this is the closest we've come to having, some interboard unanimity, full understanding of how to move forward. And at some point, even though I actually personally favored a plan similar to the one that you're representing here tonight, I ultimately, through study and through listening to people who showed up to events like this and who spoke up and really pointed out some of the inequities in that plan, I had to kind of grousingly get off my high horse and move to favor the current plan. At some point, it behooves us as a town to not let the perfect be the enemy of the good. And a lot of people really felt very comfortable and happy with this plan. And there was a lot of motivation behind it until and momentum behind it until COVID hit. So I think, at some point we need to get off the dime, settle on something and move forward. So is it cut in stone? No, not again until we, as separate boards, vote on the final version going forward. And you certainly still have time to lobby folks on the other boards or whatever. But my feeling without, we're probably going to be taking a vote soon on the Board of Ed, and then it'll be moving to the Board of Selectmen for a vote. And then finally the Board of Finance to prepare for the referendum, hopefully on February 15th.
So can you still hear me or no?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So is there, I guess, where is the platform to lobby this point of view from? I mean, I have 4 kids now, so I apologize for not being involved earlier, in this. I don't think you realize what you care about until, you're in this position. So
Yeah, of course. Yeah, just reach out to your select people. You can still reach out to the Board of Ed. We haven't, so you can reach out to the Board of Finance. Anybody, all of our names and contact information should be on either the district site for the Board of Ed or on the town website for Board of Selectmen and Board of Finance.
Okay.
And thank you so much. Please understand, I am not trying to pan you off. I greatly appreciate
No.
you asking.
I totally appreciate this platform. I really do. Can you guys maybe just highlight some of the benefits to the other plan? Because other than the 5-minute bus difference, I don't really see it. And that's just kind of where I think I'm struggling.
Absolutely. That's part of our plan, is to produce information that addresses all the benefits of this plan and not just announce the plan.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Can I just make a comment? So the busing situation can be a lot more complicated than it seems. I don't know how old your children are, but I know that when my daughter was in elementary school, I could drive from my house to Ryerson in 6 minutes. And I was going speed limit. But when she rode the bus, it would take her well over a half an hour, and she was like the second person dropped off. So, and she would have about a half-hour drive in, and she was like the second person on the bus. So it depends on the bus route, and a lot of that is, it's not determined by us, it's determined by the bus driving company. And they keep in mind the safest possible way to pick up and drop off the students to make sure they're not crossing the road, that they're not, putting themselves in a dangerous position. So even though it may seem like it's a very short drive, the actual bus route may be very different.
I totally understand. So when you look at the kids coming from Dorset and the high school, do they have, how long is their bus ride? Because that would be a pretty good indication.
It really depends on exactly where you live, and I would say a vast majority of high school students do not actually take the bus. Many of them drive or are driven, and they're involved in so many after-school activities that I would have to say, in my personal experience, there's not a lot of high school students on buses.
I just was from a research standpoint, would just say that would be a good indication as to how long the bus, just to look into.
Yeah, there actually was a study. I know Art Sickle worked with the bus company, Durham School Services, I think, to develop a study, and they had actual numbers on, and I think that's available on our website, because it was part of the whole facility study over the last however many years. It's in there somewhere, and it was just probably 2 years ago, so it's fresh. It's not from 28 BC. and it was a detailed study of how long. And I can also say that I remember one parent who was on Marblesham Heath Road or something like that, complaining that their child was actually on the bus when they were told. The state law requires no more than 45 minutes, I believe, for elementary students. I think that's what I remember. I'm going back a couple of years here, so forgive me if it's a little fuzzy, but there was some state mandate. And I remember this poor woman saying, my child was stuck on a winter day on a bus for an hour and 15 minutes because they're up in that northern, the northernmost tier of the town. And I don't think that was even going down to the central campus. So we've heard some stories, and I agree with Diane. It's not as easy as, well, it takes 5 minutes by car.
We
Thank
should,
you.
we should allow some folks in the room
Yeah.
to speak too. Thank you
Maybe
for.
you could send an email maybe to Dr. Cook and then he could hook up with Art Circle and see if he could find where the information is for her about the busing. Would that be?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay,
Thank you.
so we have a comment here. Thank you for being patient.
And Alder, I live on Green Hill Road. I have one question that I didn't see in any of the documents that came. It'll literally take us 20 minutes to get from closer than Ridge Road to the hand parking lot and back to the house. So just to give you a comparison of the traffic, and then that goes in, and then so my kids now walk uphill both ways to school. They got that. But not barefoot, not in the snow yet, but we'll figure that one out as it comes. But what it comes down to also is the traffic. So the traffic around this campus, whether you want to consider Polson Hand and the new school to be built, whether it's the stop signs or lack of stop signs on intersections, I'm looking at cops, I'm looking at Ridge Road, I'm looking at now the intersection that I just fear dreadfully is the one at Warpus and Green Hill with that nice corner with that big tree. We love to see it. But what is going to happen when you have elementary kids, high school kids driving, coming around these roads? Has there been a plan for the school, for the town, for the safety of these roads? Are there going to be sidewalks put in? Are there going to be walking trails put in? Is it going to be safe for the kids? And we all know how teenagers try to drive, and sometimes how they don't try to drive. How is this going to affect the walkability and the safety of the people who are in the neighborhood riding bikes or otherwise? And I just want to make sure that this is considered for the town and the safety of the people in the area.
Felicia Smith, Buick, 46 Ridge Road. I just want to in advance thank the voters of Madison for passing this referendum because my little ones will be the direct beneficiaries of it. But I am part of the PAC group. Christina did a lovely introduction, and I just want to tag on to that and let you know that we are here to start fostering these conversations, to have these long dialogues, to get coffee with you, to get you excited. We're excited about it. We hope you're excited about it. There's about, what, 25 of us in this room? It's going to take more than that to get this passed. It's going to take talking to our friends and neighbors. It's going to take having these difficult conversations about why this is the right plan, why it's been thought through. All these people in front of you have spent so many years and hours doing this, and they've really put thought into it. And so now it's just time to get that information out and to have these conversations. So you'll start seeing us around town. We do have a sign up if you want to get our newsletter. There is a website that we're working on launching that will have some frequently asked questions to tag along to the already very stellar frequently asked questions on the Madison Schools website. If you haven't read those, please go there. So we just want to let you know that we're here.
We are looking for people also to join us. There's a lot of information going around on social media. That seems to be how a lot of people get their information. So we do need to monitor that and have these dialogues as well. So again, our contact is contact@supportmadisonCTschools.com, and hopefully we'll hear from you.
Thank you. Is there anyone else, just in person, who hasn't had a chance to speak yet, who would like to? And is there anyone else online?
We do have one more comment in the chat box. And it is a comment, not a question, from Justin Murphy. He states, in the interest of full transparency, it should be noted that this is not an either or proposition. It's not $100 million or a new school. Under the 4-school plan, we will still have Hand, Polson, and Brown, which account for approximately 65% of the so-called 100 million 10-year maintenance capital plan. So in total, it's a new school plus 65 million for the other 3 schools.
Thank you, Wendy.
You're welcome.
Yes, sir. You give your last comment.
Thanks again. It's Rick Brown, 63 Liberty Street, and thank you for all the time that everyone here's put in on this. It's a fairly thoughtful group of people. And you know, I listened to some of the lobby groups here, which are here for a reason. They're proponents of their own beliefs. And there's another gentleman who mentioned the February referendum date, which is the dead of winter when you know, a number of people who live in some of the homes on the waterfront aren't here. When a number of people who do live here year round, like my family and I do, you know, it's not as easy getting around, and not that many people actually turn out for the vote. And I would think that with the almost $80 million referendum, I'm not sure what the largest referendum has been prior to this, but this must be tens of millions of dollars greater than any historic referendum we've had, that we would try to have it as inclusive as possible so that everyone could get out and vote, and that it's not just a group of people who feel very strongly about their opinions out voting, but the whole town. So I would echo the gentleman's perspective that February might not be the ideal date for the referendum. And again, thank you for your time. It's a thoughtful group, and you know, hopefully we all can assimilate the information, come to good conclusions. Numbers of declining population, both in our town as well as in Connecticut, I think reflect a tax burden that has driven people away. And that's my concern. Everyone has different feelings about things here, but I just think that's worth our thinking about a little further historically, what the numbers reflect, and possibly that maybe that trend is not going to be broken by adding additional taxes. But thank you again for your time.
Can I address one thing that you said, and thank you very much for bringing it up. Electors who own at least, I think, $1,000 worth of taxable property in town are able to vote by absentee ballot during referenda in Connecticut and in Madison.
Oh, yes, you will. Yep.
Jude Friedman, 368 Bartlett Drive, in Madison. I just wanted to, for the sake of clarification and transparency, add on a comment to what Justin Murphy said. The cost of the referendum and what you're looking at, we've tagged it about 89 million, if I'm correct. If that referendum is passed, there still will be items on the CIP for capital maintenance that will still have to be funded, will still have to do. And I believe that that is approximately, well, I don't know, Galen, if you remember the numbers now, but I think what we're looking at is the cost of this referendum
and the cost of capital maintenance that won't be addressed by the referendum, making that number something closer to like 128 million. I just didn't want there to be any misunderstanding from what Justin said, people thinking 89 million plus another 65 million. Those are not the numbers. If what the either or is, if the referendum isn't passed, instead of spending 89 on the plans as you put out for a new building plus refurbishing other buildings and doing the capital maintenance project, instead of spending 128, 129 million, we will be spending 100 million on capital improvements that will just be keeping these buildings going, as Bill Nen was pointing out, in the condition they're already in. And at the end of 10 years, there undoubtedly will be new maintenance and more maintenance on these old buildings. And our students still will not be learning in a 20th century environment that's needed for them to take full advantage of the 21st century curriculum. But the numbers are more like 128 million all in, including capital improvements, plus the school projects here, versus 100 million for just capital needs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So I actually have a question, if you don't mind.
Not at all.
So when we were talking about estimated cost savings, and we're saying that we're not really expecting to have savings on transportation, but the electrical, we anticipate 30,000 to potentially 100,000. Is that because of the solar panels, or is that completely separate?
So when we looked at the 3 buildings that we're going to close, looked at the, what do they cost, and then what's the projection of the new building? So we can't,
That's electrical usage. It has nothing to do with the addition of the solar panels on the new building, which could possibly help us offset our electrical
That is
costs.
correct. And if we do geothermal, that would be even better, so.
So those are unknown savings that we could possibly have, but we can't put a number on it now because we don't know if we will have them.
Right.
So then my next question is, do you think that we will save money just on maintenance of like parking lots and grounds, because we're closing the other schools and having a more centralized location? Do you anticipate having any savings from that aspect with regards to, the trees that we always have a problem with during storms, and snow plowing and just general?
So the parking lot and trees and stuff, we're still gonna own the sites, we're still gonna have facilities. So there wouldn't be that much maintenance. It's really, to me, the dependability and the reliability of the use of the facility. We're gonna have a 82,000 square foot, highly modern, very sophisticated heating and cooling system. It does gonna take maintenance. It's gonna take upkeep and control. It's the quantity, I think, that you're looking at, and I could bring and I could figure out the actual cost of all those schools and the maintenance of them. It's the reliability and the dependability that makes me concerned.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, specifically with regards to ground maintenance with parking lots and trees, because right now you have to do Ryerson, you have to do Brown, you have to do Jeffrey. But if you eliminate the Ryerson and Jeffrey components, now there's still some basic things you might have to do, but if we're no longer using those facilities, then you will not have to worry so much about the snow removal and salting, et cetera. So do you think that we would get any cost savings in the beginning, because we're only doing, the new building and the buildings that we're currently doing versus, eliminating the Ryerson and Jeffrey?
So my short answer is I don't anticipate that, because we'll be just switching. We're gonna have to plow and take care of that parking and that grass. And we might not have to be taking care of as much the Jeffrey and or the Ryerson site. We just won't have to plow the parking lots. So it's gonna be, I would say, a wash.
So until we actually have a definitive plan for the Ryerson and Jeffrey lots themselves, we can't anticipate anything.
No, I would say no. And I would also say that the new school is gonna have a much better traffic pattern. So we'll probably have more paving, because we'll have a big queue for the parking of the parents, or the parents pick up and drop off. So right now, it's very difficult at both those schools for parent drop off bus traffic. So we're gonna increase, I would say, the safety and the dropping and the picking up. Right now, it's safe, but it's very intense. I think when they planned the new school, we talked about the designs and the traffic patterns on the site. We'll definitely have more parking and more driveways to keep those traffic separate. So I wouldn't anticipate any savings on those.
I'm just trying to look for it.
Yes, no, and we have, and that's why I keep going back to my point about the reliability, and the intense, the new, whatever we pick will be much more energy efficient, outside air, ventilation, just the use of the building and the indoor air quality issues will be increased. Not that we don't have, they're not bad now, they're just gonna be better.
All right, I want to just thank you all once again for coming out tonight. You are more than welcome to stay. We do have a little bit of remaining business, including a vote whether to recommend to the boards of selectmen and finance this particular school board plan, and also to recommend the adoption of the, to approve the educational specs for the proposed new elementary school. And then we also have public comment right now. If anyone has anything apart from the school plan that you wanted to address the board about. Seeing no public comment, thank you very much. And again, thank you all for taking the time to be here tonight. Next item on the agenda is an action item to adopt a recommendation to the boards of selectmen and finance regarding the school renewal plan and approve educational specs for the proposed new elementary school. I think technically we need to do these separately. So I'm going to call first for the approval of the, because of the one relies on the other. I'm going to call first for a vote on the approval of the educational specs for the proposed new elementary school. Yes.
So I'm sorry to interrupt.
Sure.
So the action item as written on the agenda is to adopt the recommendation of the school renewal plan. But you said you also want to.
Yeah.
The second part, I think we have to have a motion to add it to the agenda. And then we voted on that,
Yes.
and then we vote on it.
Thank you. Yeah, Dr. Cook pointed out to me that we actually have to vote on that too. So, good point. Thank you, Diane. So can, the first item would be to move, and I need a motion and a second to move to add the approval of the education specs for the proposed new elementary school to tonight's agenda. Thank you, Diane. Seconded by Emily. Thank you. All right, so have all in favor of adding that, signify by saying aye and raise your hand. Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? One abstention, okay, and that is moved. Thank you. Okay, so we have voted to go ahead and next move to the substance of that, which is I'll need a motion and a second to approve the educational specs that were presented tonight on the second reading for the proposed new elementary school.
So moved.
Thank you, Maria. Kathy seconded. Thank you. All right, and now I need a vote. All in favor of? Oh yeah, I'm sorry. Is there any discussion? Yes.
Can you members vote on something that's a second read if we went through on a first?
Yes.
Okay.
You can. You may choose to abstain if you don't feel what you know have a problem about it. But you're entitled to vote. Okay. So any discussion on it besides that? No? Okay, then all in favor of adopting, I'm sorry, approving the educational specs for the specifications for the proposed new elementary school, say aye. Aye. All opposed? And one abstention, thank you. All right, and so that passes. And now I need a motion. This is on the agenda, so we don't need to put it on the agenda, but I need a substantive motion to adopt for recommendation to the boards of selectmen and finance, the school renewal plan. Maureen, and we have,
I'll second.
thank you. And any discussion? Any discussion? Okay, no discussion. All in favor of adopting for recommendation to the boards of selectmen and finance, the school renewal plan as presented tonight, raise your hand and say aye. All opposed? And one abstention, okay. All right, so that passes as well, thank you. And I know you're not gonna believe this, folks, but next on the agenda is adjournment.
Motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn, do I have a second?
Second.
All right, all in favor of adjourning, raise your hand. Thank you all very much.
No, you got the opposed. You got the opposed.
9:37.
Thanks, you're welcome.